Let me segue just a second, though, into a couple of definitions. One interesting problem, Jeff, as a writer, you'll appreciate this. One interesting problem we have in dealing with government is the use of words. And we found as we started to look at the structure of state government that government was always talking about its customers. And by its customers, though, what it really meant was its beneficiaries. The customers of government, so that this business analogy works, are the taxpayers and the people who buy services from the government, or pay taxes or pay service fees. Those are customers. Customers are a thing you want more of. Beneficiaries are not necessarily a thing that you want more of. As soon as you start mixing up your beneficiaries and your customers, then pretty soon you're trying to have more beneficiaries, because more customers is a good thing. That's not a good thing. But in trying to think about government, you really got to get the language straightened out. And then we have this horrible word stakeholders, which means anybody who gets their hand into the till. So what do you mean you have a plan for restructuring state government? You haven't consulted all of the stakeholders. Some of those stakeholders are vendors. No, they're stakeholders. Right? State employees are stakeholders. Everybody's a stakeholder, and you're not supposed to ever think out of the presence of the stakeholders, because you may come up with something that hinders the stakeholders. Now, when we think about government, when we think about our for-profit vendors, we don't quite have that problem. If we're trying to make the agency of transportation more efficient, nobody says, hey, you didn't bring Pike and Whitcomb in here to tell you how you ought to bid the contracts. Matter of fact, they talk to each other, they go to jail. It actually happened when I was Secretary of Transportation. Because they talk to each other. We don't say that they're stakeholders, we said they're vendors, right? We want them to do the most they can for the least money. That's good, nice, simple relationship. When we were designing challenges for change and we talked about sending less prisoners out of state, there was no lobbyist from Corrections Corporation of America coming and telling the legislature, you can't do that, we're going to have all these empty prison cells in Kentucky, and that'll be very bad. So we didn't have much of a problem coming up with or getting legislative permission to pass a plan that would allow us to send less prisoners out of state. In fact, the legislature went along with a lot of what we wanted to do until it got to the point that the goals of challenges for change were to spend $38 million less of general fund money in fiscal year 11 than we did in fiscal year 10 within the challenged areas, and to spend $72 million less in fiscal 12, and to do that through what we called in modern jargon sustainable savings, meaning we weren't just going to hold our breath and wait for the recession to go away or defer maintenance or something like that. It apparently hadn't occurred to some people inside and outside the legislature that if government spent $38 million less, somebody was going to get $38 million less. So initially there were complaints that challenges for change was a shadow, that it was a device to allow the government to pretend that it had a balanced budget, when in fact it didn't have a balanced budget. Then we presented the plan with the savings in it, and the complaint was, we can't do all that stuff. I mean, look at all the people, what about the stakeholders? They're not going to get their money. This is too much to do. Well, it was a lot to do. And in fact, what we were proposing was a pretty big restructuring of state government. We didn't get it all, but we got a lot of it. But there was a lot to do because it was overdue. And waiting another year, taking longer, spending more time consulting the stakeholders wouldn't have made things any better. It would have made them worse. Because when we got to fiscal 12, as is going to happen with the education fund, there's not going to be half a year of stimulus money, there's going to be no year of stimulus money. And the problems that we left unaddressed would have gotten even worse. There was an interesting pattern to what happened. We got permission, we went to the legislature with a plan for $31 million worth of changes. That's because we thought we needed legislation or legislative relief to get $31 million, and we thought we could save the other 7 without any new legislation. Still think that. What happened is that the legislature only gave us permission for $23.5 million worth of the $31 million that we asked for permission, if you're following the numbers. Not only that, but since we had dutifully told the legislature what we were planning to do, including some of the things that we were planning to do that didn't require any legislation, some legislation got passed, or at least proposed, that would have stopped us from doing the things that we were planning to do that didn't need any legislation to begin with. So we were starting to go backwards. In the end, we ended up with a compromise, and compromises are never completely satisfactory. This compromise, I think, the things that we got were good, the things that we didn't get are missed opportunities. But it's interesting to look at what they were. The legislature gave us permission for $23.5 million worth of savings. They took back, in the end, most of the language that would have forbid us from making the savings that we didn't need permission for. They threw in $5.16 million worth of one-time federal money, so that doesn't really count at all, but that takes us up to 28 something. And they left us having to get 10 million of savings. But as we got to the last minute of the bill, we had a real problem because the Speaker and the President pro tem had said, well, you know, this challenges stuff is okay. If it doesn't work, don't worry, we'll fund it out of the rainy day fund. Now, in order to make challenges work, we have to work with a lot of organizations, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute, who thought we should be going into the rainy day fund to begin with. So we were going to go out to these organizations who thought we were supposed to go into the rainy day fund and say, you really got to cooperate with us in making challenges for change work, because if you don't, we'll have to go into the rainy day fund. I wasn't looking forward to making that argument, but we did, in the end, get a compromise, a good one, in this case, which said that if challenges for change doesn't work, that we can make plain old cuts. We don't want to do that. We'd rather restructure. We'd rather be more effective. But it's much better to have that as a backstop than to have the backstop be to go into the rainy day fund, because that's something that there's a common interest in avoiding. So hopefully that's the dog that barks so it doesn't have to bite. But we do have the authority to make cuts. The language is still there that says if we're going to cut outside of restructuring, that we have to go to Joint Fiscal Committee and they can approve or disapprove, which is probably unconstitutional, but at the end of it is a key phrase that says the Secretary can go ahead anyway. So the legislature has some moral or immoral suasion, but we can go ahead and do what we need to do to achieve the savings under challenges. Again, it's our intent to do that structurally. If not, then it gets done by plain old cost cutting, but $38 million plug in the budget is real, and not, except for that $5 million of federal money, is real. Now it's interesting to look at what worked and what didn't work. We got permission to do a lot of restructuring within state government, to substitute people doing things online who are able to and want to, rather than doing them by paper. You won't believe how many people in state government's job it is to open the mail and then key the stuff on the mail into a screen. You won't believe how bad the service is if you're a beneficiary or a customer of state government, if you have to fill out an obscure form, send it in, probably with the wrong information, then wait weeks for somebody to process it and then have it come back to you because you put in the wrong information. It's much, much better service, assuming you can get online. That you fill out a form and the form tells you what's wrong and you get the form right, and then the computer tells you you did or didn't qualify to get a license or get your license reinstated or register for food stamps, which is now called Foursquares, or whatever else you're transacting with the government. We got permission to invest money in keeping people out of jail instead of money in keeping them in jail. Those are good investments.